Good day, everyone. How are you? We hope that you are doing okay today. So, are you ready to listen to us about the Pentateuch and the historical books of the Bible? But before that, let us introduce ourselves first. We are Group 7 from the College of Medical Laboratory Science 1B. And now, let us proceed to the first part of our report, which is about the Pentateuch.
The first book that we will discuss would be Pentateuch. But first, let us know what is its definition. Pentateuch. The Pentateuch is a term that refers to the Bible's first 5 books. These 5 books comprise the Bible's theological foundation. These 5 books are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Also, both Jewish and Christian tradition ascribe primary authorship to Moses for the majority of the Pentateuch. The term Pentateuch is derived from the 2 Greek terms penti means 5 and tukos means teaching or book. It is a colloquial term for 5 vessels, 5 containers, or a 5-volume book. The Hebrew word for Pentateuch is Torah, which translates as the law or the instruction. The 5 books, nearly entirely written in Hebrew, are the Bible's law's books, given to us by God through Moses. The Pentateuch is also referred to as Moses' 5 books. This is a photo of a 1,000-year-old Pentateuch that is now exhibited in the Museum of the Bible. The Pentateuch books, written more than 3,000 years ago, introduced Bible readers to God's divine purposes and plans and explain how sin entered the world. Additionally, the Pentateuch depicts God's response to sin. His relationship with mankind provides valuable insight into God's character and nature. The Pentateuch records God's dealings with humanity from the beginning of the world to Moses' death. It weaves together poetry, prose, and law to create a time-traveling theatrics encompassing thousands of years.
One of the most notable Bible verses written in the Pentateuch would be the 10 Commandments. Exodus chapter 20, verse 1 to 17. Then God gave the people all these instructions. I am the Lord your God, who rescued you from the land of Egypt, the place of your slavery. You must not have any other God but me. You must not make for yourself an idol of any kind, or an image of anything, in the heavens, or on the earth, or in the sea. You must not bow down to them, or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, who will not tolerate your affection for any other gods. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children. The entire family is affected, even children, in the 3rd and 4th generations of those who reject me. But I lavish unfailing love for 1,000 generations on those who love me and obey my commands. You must not misuse the name of the Lord your God. The Lord will not let you go unpunished if you misuse his name. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the 7th day he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. Honor your father and mother, then you will live a long, full life in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You must not murder. You must not commit adultery. You must not steal. You must not testify falsely against your neighbor. You must not covet your neighbor's house. You must not covet your neighbor's wife, male or female servant, ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. A piece of the Ten Commandments, a leather parchment scroll dating back 2,000 years, displayed in the Discovery Times Square exposition.
Hello, are you guys still there? Did you enjoy listening to the Pentateuch? And since we have already learned something about it, let us now proceed to the historical books of the Bible.
The historical books is a section of the Bible that includes books that deals with the history of the nation of Israel, like especially on how it became the Promised Land. These books cover the life of the nation from their possession of the land down to the 2 deportations and loss of the land because of the unbelief and disobedience. The historical books includes the books of Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st Kings, 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Furthermore, the book covers about 800 years of Israel's history. The 12 books tells about the following: conquering and possession of Canaan, the reigns of the judges, the establishment of kings, the division of Israel into the northern and southern kingdom, the fall of the northern kingdom to Assyria, the exile of the southern kingdom into Babylon, the return to Jerusalem under the leadership of men like Nehemiah and Ezra. The next 12 books detail the history of God's people, of ancient Israel's formation, rise to prominence, collapse into moral and physical defeat, and restoration. They record the history of Israel, beginning with the conquest of the land of Canaan and ending with the return of God's people from foreign captivity. Now, let us dig deeper about the contents of each part of the historical books of the Bible. The book of Joshua tells the story of the Israel's arrival at Canaan, the long-awaited promised land, under the leadership of Joshua. After a series of major battles, during which their dependence on God is repeatedly demonstrated, the Israelites establish a society in accordance with God's law. This book is given the name Joshua because, though Joshua was one of the world's greatest military and strategists of history, his wisdom and military achievements came from the Lord, who alone is our salvation. It was the Lord himself who brought about victory for Israel and vanquished Israel's enemies, giving them possession of the land.
Judges. Israel is repeatedly oppressed by neighboring tribes and kingdoms, and God faithfully raises up judges to deliver his people. Doctrinally, Judges draws our attention to a number of important truths. As God had warned in Deuteronomy, obedience brings blessing, but disobedience results in God's discipline and oppression. But Judges also remind us that when people will turn to the Lord, cry out to him and repent, God, who is long-suffering and gracious, responds in deliverance. Judges unfold its theme by describing cycles of apostasy, followed by oppression as a form of divine discipline, followed by supplication and repentance by the people, followed by judges, whom God raised up to deliver the nation. Ruth. Ruth tells the story of a foreign woman who is welcomed into Israelite society. Ruth is a story of loyalty, purity, and love in a day when anarchy, selfishness, and depravity was generally the rule. 1 and 2 Samuel. These books describe the establishment of the Israelite monarchy, as the people cry out to be ruled by a king. In particular, they tell the story of David's rise to power as Israel's most famous ruler. Originally, the book 1 and 2 Samuel were placed together as one book in the Hebrew Bible. These two books give the history of the monarchs of Israel in the early period of the monarchy. Fundamentally, 1 Samuel is about King Saul, and 2 Samuel is about King David. Both 1 and 2 get their names from the prophet Samuel, whom God used in the transition from using judges to the establishment of the monarchy. Though originally one book, 1 and 2 Samuel were divided into two books by the translators of the Septuagint. This divisions was later followed by Jerome, the Latin Vulgate, and by modern versions. The title of the book has varied from time to time, having been designated the first and second books of the kingdoms by Septuagint, first and second Kings by Vulgate, first and second Samuel by Hebrew tradition and most modern version. 1 and 2 Kings continue the story of the great rulers of Israel, although Israel's story takes a tragic turn as the kingdom splits in two and begins a steady drift away from God, even as enemy nations like Assyria press. First Kings not only gives a record of history of these kings, but it demonstrates the success of any king and of the nation as a whole. Depends on the measure of the king's allegiance to God's law or truth. Second Kings teaches that willful sin in a nation has a woeful end. In 1 and 2 Samuel, the nation is born. In 1 Kings, it is divided, and in 2 Kings, it is dispersed. After years of pleading with his people through the prophets, God's patience finally turns to discipline, just as he promised. 1 and 2 Chronicles. Assyrians conquer northern and Babylonians conquer southern. A return to the story of David and his successor kings, covering some of the same ground as 1 and 2 Kings. Chronicles is more than simply an historical record. It is God's commentary on the spiritual characteristic of David's dynasty. Because of this, the focus is on the kingdom of Judah, the southern kingdom where there were revival and godly kings in David's line, and where the northern kingdom, with no godly kings, is basically ignored.
Ezra and Nehemiah. The Persian king allows some Jewish captives to return to their homeland with Ezra. These two books skip ahead in history and document Israel's return to their homeland after years of captivity in Babylon. Jerusalem is rebuilt and repopulated as a living example of God's forgiveness and power to restore. From a spiritual and doctrinal standpoint, Ezra demonstrates how God fulfilled his promise to return his people to the land of promise after 70 years of exile as announced by the prophets. Nehemiah was also written to show the obvious hand of God in the establishment of his people in their homeland in the years after their exile. Under the leadership of Nehemiah, they accomplished in 52 days what had not been done in the 94 years since the first return under Zerubbabel. By obedient faith, they were able to overcome what appeared to be insurmountable opposition. Esther. The story of Esther, who risked her life to stop the genocide of her people. Esther tells a story of a beautiful Jewish girl whom King Xerxes of Persia chose to be his queen. When Haman plotted to murder all the Jews, Queen Esther's cousin, Mordecai, persuaded Esther to try and save her people. Risking her own life, she appealed to the king and rescued the Jews. Although the name of God does not appear in this book, the theme and purpose of the book is to show God's providential care of his people in their trials and persecutions. It is generally believed that the historical books have been written during the Babylonian captivity in the middle of the 6th century BC. It is traditionally believed to have been written by Joshua and Samuel themselves. However, they are now often lumped with Deuteronomy due to their similar style and language. Nevertheless, there is a substantial gap between the discovery of Deuteronomy under Josiah in about 640 BC and the middle of the Babylonian captivity somewhere around 550 BC. However, it's possible that some of the youngest priests who were alive in the time of Josiah were still alive when Babylon hauled off the whole country as captives. Whether it was these priests of the Deuteronomy era or their successors that wrote Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, these texts represent a highly mythologized history of their newly dispossessed people thanks to the Babylonian captivity. One of the most notable Bible verses written in the historical books would be Joshua 24, verse 15. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord.
And that's the end of our report. We hope that you have learned something from us today. Thank you for listening, and we wish you well. Please stay safe and continue to trust the Lord in everything that you do. We will leave you with the famous Bible verse from Isaiah chapter 4, verse 10. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. God bless everyone.